we've experienced through disasters, that the last Arch Live, which can be found on our Facebook page, was about disaster response. And so some of you may find that interesting to go back and view if you would like to get some more information about that. And that's all for my update. I believe that we have Jenny with LCG here to talk to us a little bit about an update on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Jenny, are you here?
Hear me okay?
Yeah, there you are.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've got an update on the numbers for the LEAP program. The total dollar amount dispersed thus far has been $6.47 million. And the total amount of approved applications has been 2,163.
Well, that's fantastic. So over 2,000 households assisted with rent to help prevent them from becoming homeless. That's an amazing number. Thank you for that. Is there anything further you wanted to share about that program?
Oh, no, ma'am. I think that's it. Did y'all need any more information?
Not unless anybody has any questions. Okay. Another brief update from Acadiana Legal Services. We have Taylor Robinson here to share some updates on eviction moratorium and things of that sort.
Hi. Yeah, so right now we are currently in a eviction suspension due to Hurricane Ida. So basically all legal deadlines are suspended. That's ending on Monday though. So the earliest a landlord can file for eviction again is going to be Monday if their notice to vacate has been waived in the lease agreement. So if not, then they'll have to do the normal 5-day notice to vacate and then file for evictions. So at this point, we're anticipating more evictions coming up shortly. And we're definitely trying to intervene and tell people about the rental assistance programs and try to get them on board with that as soon as possible. That's really all I have on my end.
Okay, thanks. Taylor, I think the information that you just provided is really critical, especially for those who were who lost their home due to Ida. In some cases, we're hearing of situations where landlords are saying, because of the damage, that, you know, you're evicted, come get your stuff. And is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that that is not following the proper legal protocols for because there's no way to actually do an eviction at this time.
Correct. Yeah. Anytime they're evicting someone, they need to do it the legal way, file the eviction in court. That way the person has their day in court to defend themselves. Yeah, so that's not the correct way to do it. And there may be an action on the back end if they are wrongfully evicted. But yeah, for right now, they're not supposed to be able to evict anyone.
Okay, so if somebody is experiencing that or knows somebody who is, trying to assist somebody who is, then getting in touch with Acadiana Legal would be a good first step.
Yes, and if they're in the parishes outside of or by Baton Rouge, it would be SLLS, I believe, Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. They're like our sister organization, but if they're in our general region, it would be our office.
Great, thanks for that update.
No problem.
Okay, one more update is with Rebuilding Together Acadiana of Catholic Charities of Acadiana. Jody.
Hi. Okay, so, all right. So just a quick rundown of some disaster numbers and then also Rebuilding Together regular delayed maintenance numbers. So for Laura and Delta, we have 27 in phase 1 open. Those are mostly people that have called us and said that their tarp has deteriorated and they need a new one, or that their roof hadn't been actively leaking and is now leaking. We have 45 unmet needs. Most of those are trees and yards. 261 in long-term recovery. So we've mailed out applications to all these folks. 173 have not been returned, but we do have 80 that have been received, and we're currently working to move those folks through long-term recovery. And we have 840 homes closed. So that's great. For the May floods, we had 45 requests for services. We have 6 currently that we're working on and 3 that have been completed. And for Ida, we have 22 requests. Most of those requests have been referred on to folks that are on the ground locally. So for Rebuilding Together, we are circling back around and trying to get back into the Blue Skies operation. We have for 2021 and our 2022 program year, we have a total of 350 requests for services. Now, many of those requests have not sent in the applications, but the ones that we do have, we have 57 for 2021 and 24 for 2022. And then in addition to that, 19 ramps in the queue. So we'll be building lots of wheelchair ramps. Some good news is that we got some funding through USDA Rural Development to expand into the Breaux Bridge area. So if you have clients that are in need, that are homeowners that live in Breaux Bridge specifically, that need some assistance, please let us know and we'll get them an application.
Great. Thanks, Jody. Does anybody have questions for anybody who's provided an update this morning? Okay. Well, I will share with you guys, I mean, listening to Jody talk about, well, for this disaster, and then for this disaster, and then for this disaster, we're kind of piling disasters one on top of another. And as a continuum of care, we were applying with HUD for an extension on some of the response for the funding that's available. And in doing so, we were looking at the number of disasters that our area has been dealing with over the last year and a little bit. And so, Elsa, can you roll the slide forward a little bit? There. So we pulled together these visuals and, really looking at them, it hit us that, so there's been 7 major disaster declarations for Louisiana in the last 13 months. And just looking at what our region has dealt with between hurricanes and freeze and the May floods. And of course, we have COVID-19 as a general disaster over the whole of the thing. We could begin to see like why our souls are tired and why it feels like we can't get back to any kind of normalcy. We're kind of constantly in disaster preparation or response mode. And the wear that has on us, even those of us in helping professions who kind of are used to being the ones who provide the help. And so it felt like an important thing to at least name and lift up and acknowledge that our region is going through. And so I'm really grateful that we have been able to have Marie Collins with Family Tree joining us this morning to talk with us a little bit about the trauma that we've all been through and the impact that has on our work. And so I'm going to just turn this right over to Marie, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. Thanks for being here.
Okay. Thank you for having me. So when Elsa called me, so full disclaimer, like I have all this information in my brain because at the beginning of the pandemic, I became really, really concerned about the trauma that we were facing and the compacting trauma that we're continuing to face. And I'm going to talk about that today. And so I've done a really deep dive over the last 2 years into what trauma means and how we're affected, not just for our clients, but more specifically for ourselves, because I was really worried about my staff and the toll that it takes on our people. The information, I have like a ridiculous amount of information in my head. I did pull together a PowerPoint just so I could like try and keep myself on target because I have like a ridiculous amount. But hopefully somebody will watch the chat because I'm happy to take any questions. There's definitely more information that I can share, but I'm going to try and stay on topic. So let's see. Oh, close that. And okay. So again, stop me if you have questions. But what I titled it is like COVID and trauma versus self-care and motivation. And so nobody instant eye roll usually happens when I say self-care. Please don't eye roll yet. You can eye roll later maybe, but don't eye roll on me yet. But I may, work a little bit with that title. It's a working title, let's say that. So I kind of thought of this as trauma whiplash. So you're thinking back to the 2016 floods, because that's the first one that I remember in my head that we were like really impacted, and, BOAD just, blew up. But that was an isolated incident. And then there was a lull, relatively speaking. And then now we're looking at, bless its heart, 2020, with COVID and the hurricanes and the freeze. And it was just like one thing after another. And so when we got to the end of 2020, I had a really big concern about people's expectations, because they kept saying, oh, we just need to get to 2021. We just need to get to 2021. And I was like, we got to stop saying that, y'all. Like, nothing is going to change in 2021. It's not this like magic ball drop. Things are going to be wonderful. And that proved to be true. Even though we got the vaccine, we've had, political issues related to that. And then, of course, the Delta variant. Just when we were starting to kind of lower our anxiety level, Delta pops back up, and then we go into hurricane season, and now we're back in the throes. And so we keep saying, and so now I hear people saying, well, maybe 2022 is going to be the new normal. Let's not count our chickens before they hatch. So we're going to look at kind of our expectations and moving ahead. So there are more than one type of trauma, and I can pull, I can give you this link I can put it in the chat after the fact so y'all can go to, because that website, the National Institute with Trauma, is a really great website to get information about trauma. But most people think of it as, oh, well, of course we have, abuse trauma, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse. Those things are, top of our head. That makes sense. But there's actually a significant number more. And so we talk about bullying with kids, but community violence, which we have been facing in our whole country, is a trauma. Complex trauma is when multiple things happen, which now we are all facing complex trauma because we have the political climate, we have the COVID, and then we have our hurricanes and our flooding and all the other things. So now we have multiple layers of trauma, which impact differently. Of course, disasters, early childhood trauma. You talk about early infant mental health at 0 to 5 is a really key time in kids' lives. Intimate partner violence, which we're very familiar with, medical trauma. So you hear people with traumatic birth stories or hospital stories. Now we're hearing that more and more as people go into the hospital and they can't get a bed. And so they're being sent home and then they get sicker. And so you have these people who are now getting distrustful or scared. And so that's a trauma. Physical trauma, refugee trauma, sexual abuse trauma, sex trafficking, terrorism, violence, and then traumatic grief. And so these are often big T traumas is what we refer to them, but there's also these little t traumas that we can face in our life that are things that just happen to us that we might not go, oh my God, that was a traumatic event. Like, let's say you lost someone to COVID. So obviously you're going to have grief. But if someone got sick and then you couldn't see them for a very long time, so we're talking about our elderly population that you aren't able to visit, that's a trauma for them as well as potentially for you not being able to see them. That may be a little t trauma because they're not able to see their family members. So what we have right now is collective trauma. So that means we're all facing it at one time. And the reason why this is different from past traumas is not everyone in the country was facing trauma. So yes, we had the floods in 2016, but it was only related to our area. It wasn't the whole country. So we could reach out, like when we had a hurricane, if you think about Katrina, they had a huge, like nationally, I think if I remember correctly, there was like I think celebrities got together and had like a fundraiser because they weren't affected. So they could come in and be sort of those hero and say, we're going to help you and we're going to do this big push for donations, or the Red Cross can come in and do this big push. But when the entire country is having a reaction to the event, there is not one person who can step back and be subjective. So that's often why you say, we hear people, we talk all the time, again, being a counselor, we're saying go to counseling, because you get to talk to someone who is an outsider in your situation. So they have no skin in the game. And so they can look at it objectively. They can have empathy as opposed to like falling apart with you in that moment. But what's happening right now is with COVID and the other traumas that we're facing as a country is the universality of it is that there is no one person who is not affected. And so because we're all going through together, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. So there's not one person. You can't call them up and be like, oh my God, you won't believe what happened, because it's happening to them too. And so we almost feel this burden to not share because you're like, oh my gosh, well, I mean, my life is horrible, but I mean, they're going through it too. Theirs is just as bad or theirs is worse. And then we start comparing trauma, which is not good to do. Cannot compare trauma. But that's what we're doing because we're all facing trauma. So it's harder to find that connectiveness. There's a relentlessness to COVID that is different from others, which I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then with collective trauma, you also have collective memory. So you can look back, like I remember, I mean, there's lots of negatives with memory for past hurricanes, 2016, those floods, but you also have positive memories of people coming in. I mean, we got disaster money to be able to provide free counseling. I remember for Hurricane Andrew, my entire family descended on our house, like all the aunts and uncles and all the cousins. And so for me, I think I was in high school, that was like the funnest thing ever because we basically had a giant hurricane party. And so, you can have those memories because it's an isolated incident. So here's how it affects the community. How it typically happens when you have a trauma. So you're thinking about the 2016 flood, okay? So there's an epicenter of the event. Normally you have one spot, whether it's New Orleans or whether it's when it was up in New York. New York had hurricanes and different things. So, or fires in California, there's a center of it. It's not the whole country. But what's happening now is it's the whole country. So typically what we face is there's an immediate impact and then a mobilization. So people rush in to help, good, bad, or ugly. I mean, we've all seen the good helpers and we've also seen the toxic helpers, but they still come, So eventually after the initial need, it begins to subside. The helpers become exhausted. They start leaving or dropping out. They go back home. We're left, those people who are here are left to continue to pick up the pieces. So those in the immediate impacted area, I remember that from the flood from 2016. I mean, it was 2 years out before we were, finalizing some things. There were still people whose houses weren't repaired, so there were still people who were in the thick of it, but it wasn't everyone. So there were still some people who got to get out for a second, breathe a little bit, and then could come back in if they needed to, as opposed to often with us, especially at this coalition, y'all are in it all the time. And so for you, the trauma does not fade away. It stays all the time. Where for most trauma, there's a sort of a reprieve. And so y'all are here day in and day out with that acknowledgement and support of what's happening. So individually, what is happening to your body or to our clients or the people that you're helping, whatever you want to call them, we go into fight, flight, freeze mode. So we're all familiar with this. It's survival mode. As soon as it happens, the adrenaline kicks in and you go. And we start having, you get really, really amped up, and we all come in, but that mode compounds on trauma. So if you're already living in this fight, flight, freeze mode, which means your adrenaline is up and then another trauma happens. So right now our adrenaline is up already because of COVID. We're always thinking about it every time we go anywhere. We now have masks in all kinds of places we never expected to. And we go somewhere, you get out of the car, you're like, I forgot my mask. And so then, so it's constantly bringing this up. We're grabbing our kids, put the mask on. So we're constantly heightened. And then you add this second level of having a hurricane coming. And so then you get the media involved, and then so the anxiety starts building. So now you have a double layer of this, and your body starts to freak out. And so like I said, your connectedness to your body often starts to separate, because you know that so much is happening in there. You're like, oh my God, there's too much. My stomach hurts. I'm getting headaches every day. You start trying to deal with it. We have a huge increase in substance use right now because we're trying to deal with that. I need to wind down, and I don't have time to take a week off and go on vacation. Like, that's not an option, but I can have my glass of wine at night. Connected with other people is the absolute key to buffering this stress. So that sense of belonging, that sense of connectedness. And normally we have that in a disaster. But when you have COVID on top of it, where we can't connect with other people, again, compacting the trauma. So we talk about resiliency a lot, because that's what we are. We are a resilient people. But there's different kinds of resiliency, which I didn't realize until recently, because I just thought resiliency was sort of a one size, like you just keep getting back up. Like when you fall down, you just keep getting back up. And sometimes we do. And so I thought this was a good analogy. So some people bounce back like a Nerf ball. You can squeeze them. And in some tragic incidents or some disasters, you bend and mold and shape. And then when it's over, you pop back to normal. That's one way to be resilient. But another way is the metal coat hanger concept. So if you've ever bent a metal coat hanger to either fish something out of the drain or, to make s'mores on the fire, you know that you can, in fact, get the coat hanger back into that, kind of triangle shape. You can do it if you work really hard, but it's not going to be exact. It's not going to look exactly the same. Something has been changed. And so it still could work, and you may be able to use it for a bunch of different things, but now there's weaknesses in certain places. And that can cause, if you keep bending it and like, okay, we're going to straighten it out again. And now I'm going to bend it back and I'm going to straighten it out again. You may have to use other things to keep it strong, because you can't keep bending in the same spot without breaking. But this is also resiliency, because at this point, this is when we learn new skills so that we can strengthen those places where we had to bend. And so the first question I want to ask you today, I want you to start thinking about, and feel free to write these down, because this is something that you may want to journal about or just like think about. But I want you to think about in the concept of that coat hanger resilience. Now that I'm bending back, because we all had to change, we all had to bend, we had to mold, we had to do things differently. And so now we're bending back, but how do I want to look now? And so I have found that asking myself these questions helps me to really get a handle on how do I really want to put my life back together? Do I want it to look the same as I did before? Because what I found is that I stayed very, very busy prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic put a giant stop sign in front of me and stopped us cold. And suddenly we were like, well, what do I do with myself? I can't go anywhere. I can't be distracted. I've watched everything on Netflix. Now what do I do? And so when we now are starting to get back, we've gotten a little bit used to this slower pace where we don't have all the events to go to. We don't have all the things. And so we get to decide what we want to bring back into our life. So before you jump back in, because again, we're still struggling with this. So we have got to take care of ourselves first. And I mean, y'all know I'm not going to do the airplane thing because everybody knows the airplane thing, but that's basically what I'm alluding to, the face mask. So think before you act. As we're making our schedules, as you're looking at your day, at the very beginning of the day, think before you start. What's your intention for the day? Why am I doing these things? Am I doing these things just because this is what I've always done? Am I doing these things because this is what I think I'm supposed to do? Does this bring you meaning anymore? Where do you find your hope? Do you really want to take this back? And the key there is what would happen if you didn't. That one will scare you a little bit. Like, what if I didn't do that anymore? Who would be mad at me? Would I be mad at me? Would other people be mad at me? But would that mean that I am able to continue doing the things I need to do? Because what I found, one of the things that I found during the pandemic was I let my schedule control me. I would just schedule things. People would call. I'd be like, yeah, I can do that. And next thing I know, especially during the pandemic, because you could do the Zoom calls. So you would go from like one call and you're like, oh, this call ends at 10. And so the next meeting opens at 10. And then you were like, I have to go to the bathroom. Like I haven't eaten in like an entire day. What happened? It's because I kept scheduling Zoom calls because I didn't have to travel anymore. And so about halfway through, I guess about 9 months in, I was like, if I don't like schedule in like potty breaks, like we're gonna have a problem here. And so you would like tell people, you're like, I'm sorry, can I run to the bathroom? Like send me your apologizing for like bodily functions. Like, how did we get there? And so I ended up like pulling back and doing this, like what no longer serves you. So recognizing I needed to build more cushion in my day. And now that we're back in the office, I have continued that. And I'm more mindful because my day and most people's day does not end with our work day. We got the second shift when you go home. Because, in most cases, we've made these extra people that we now have to take care of or significant others or other things that you want to do in your life. And you want to have energy for that too. So you got to pace yourself a little more. And I think the pandemic has allowed us that space to look at that. And the other thing, if you can't get on board with the other stuff, remember that our clients and our kids are looking to us to lead them. When your client sits across from you, they believe and need to see that you can lead them. And that's what we want to show. We want to show the good stuff. So they're looking to you for support, and you can't take from an empty cup. And so we have got to look at these things because this is long-term. This is not a short-term solution. We are so far into this that we've got to recognize where we are, because 2022 is not going to be the end all be all of everything's going to be back to normal and we can do, move about the cabin. We're in for the long haul. And so we've got to figure out a way to do things differently to take care of ourselves in the long haul. So self-care, again, don't roll your eyes yet. Self-care, strangely enough, originally a medical concept. Doctors knew they could not do all the things when the 15 minutes that you sat in front of them and you said, I have this symptom and this symptom and this symptom, this symptom. And they said, here's some medicines, go and be well. And so they were the ones who first, years and years ago, rolled out this concept of self-care, which was while you're not in the doctor's office, take care of yourself, that preventative medicine kind of thing. And so self-care in the real world, all right? So self-care has become a marketing word. So self-care, of course, is, buying the pretty things at Target and getting the massages and getting your nails done. Of course, those things can all be self-care, but real world is not always that accessible. Not all of our clients can assess that. And sometimes it's just not an option. If it is, wonderful, more power to you. Go ahead and do it. You know those things. I don't have to go through them. Things that you can do in the real world. 1, key boundaries. Right out the gate. Give an honest yes and no. If you don't want to do it, say you don't want to do it. Because every time you say yes, you say no to something else. And the no is probably something that you actually want to do. And of course, there's going to be times, caveat, with the little asterisk, there's going to be times you have to say yes because, like your boss told you had to do it. And so you're like, I don't want to do it, but you still have to do it. But the majority of our yes and no's are yours to make. And so how many times are you saying yes to something you want to say no to, and then you resent the other person and yourself because it wasn't honest? So that could be a whole talk in and of itself, but I'm staying focused. The mind-body connection. Okay, so one of the things I also realized was that I never noticed my breathing. I held my breath during life. And during the pandemic, I realized how much I held my breath. And so I started working on meditation and mindfulness and listening to where my body was saying, you need to take a time out. And so I pushed myself way too hard this past year. And by the time we had our Elder Care Summit at the beginning of August, I had burnt out crispy. I was crispy fried and basically went to my board and was like, I have to take August off because I can't go anymore. And if I want to continue to do the kind of work that I want to do, I've got to stop. And the truth is, I should have said it a long time ago. And I waited because I kept saying yes to things I should have said no to. And I suffered. And my body suffered. And I got sick and I couldn't get better. And so I had to basically drop off the map for a month. But you don't have to let it get that far. There's things you can do in the interim. So breathing is key. Most of us have these little watches and you can put the little breathing thing that tells you to breathe every now and then. How many times do you go the whole day and you don't notice that you breathed one time? Breathing actually is the thing that controls your nervous system. And so it can help you energize. It can also, the in-breath helps with energizing. The out-breath, which typically you want to be longer, actually is the thing that calms you down. And so if you know anything about breathing, I'll give you the quick tip. It's 4-4-4, 4-4-6. So breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, and then breathe out for 6. Do that 3 times at any point. You could do it in the car. You could do it between meetings. That will help. And you can start, as you do it, you will start to feel your body slow down a little bit. And so you're helping with that fight, flight, freeze to bring that adrenaline down. Learning how to discharge the stress. We've talked a ton over the years about the fight, flight, or freeze and how it works. But if you just move around, and the weather's beautiful. So even if you take a walk around the office, take a walk outside, or stand up and shake like a dog. Not even kidding you. Take a page out of your dog's book, because that's how animals in the wild release their adrenaline when they have been chased, and it increases. And you'll see them after that when the threat has subsided, they shake. And so now if I have 1 second and I know that I'm heightened, you can just shake before you go into something else. Checking your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. They are real. They do control you in many cases if you don't pay attention to them. And so regulating your emotions, whether it's with other people. I have to regulate mine by myself. I have to completely get away from people and be alone. Some people regulate better when they're with other people. Some people don't want to be around people at all, and they just want to be around their pets, which is totally fine too. So you find where you can breathe and slow down a little bit. Of course, counseling. And then the other thing that I have found is the journaling. Okay, so you've heard about journaling, and some people love it, some people hate it. I hated it for a long time. But there is something to be said for journaling 3 pages a day. It doesn't matter when in the day you do it, but you can just write stream of consciousness. Doesn't matter what you say. Like, you could be like, I don't want to be even writing my pages today. I am just doing this. It doesn't matter what you say, but there is something that physical that happens in your brain when you get the thoughts out of your head onto paper, because as long as they're in there, they multiply. When they come out, you can hold them up to the lens and make a choice about them. But if you don't know they're there, they live rent free. So let's see, where am I? So motivation. All right. So right now that may be some of it, because there's sometimes you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my God, I can't do this again today. So remember, how you do it is your choice. You don't have to go back to doing it the way you did it before. You have more control over your life than you think you do. You get to choose what you bring back in and how you bring it back in. Staying present in the moment is very important. Taking that pause to make a choice, because again, the past has happened and the future we can't control. So all we've got is this moment right here. So what is actually happening to you in that moment? And then make a choice based on that. Paying attention to your body. What is your body telling you? Are you sick and you're ignoring it? How long have you been ignoring it? Because eventually that's going to catch up with you. And when you study trauma and the way trauma works in your body keeps the score. If anyone's read the book, phenomenal book, your body will keep the score. And so what you don't deal with, it will hold in your body and come up later. And so pay attention. It is talking to you. And it'll tell you what's going on. We just don't always listen to it. So hopefully that was in fact what y'all were wanting. Y'all can tell me if that was on the mark, or but please ask me questions about what I've said.
Marie, I have a question.
Yes.
We're hearing about stuff like fatigue and headaches and fuzzy thinking. When is that normal, either in ourselves or our clients, and when should we become concerned?
Okay. So that's a great question. So again, when your adrenaline is running, when you're in that fight, flight, freeze mode, it is absolutely typical because your blood pressure is going to go up. Your senses are going to heighten. And so your functioning, the whole point is so that your prefrontal cortex is going offline, which is why your thinking is funny, because it's wanting to respond really quickly. So it's your amygdala and those things that respond really, really quickly that's working during that time. And so what you need is for your prefrontal cortex to come back online. And in order to do that, you got to slow down. Because as long as you're moving really, really fast, your body is going to stay in that hyper arousal mode. And you are not going to make the best decisions. So it is key to, and understand when you're in a crisis situation. So when the event is happening to you in the moment, you absolutely want to respond like the tiger is chasing you. However, the moment that the tiger is no longer chasing you, we've got to get your brain to come back online. And so at that time is when you've got to do these self-care techniques to slow your body back down so that your prefrontal cortex, so again, that's your rational mind, your rational thinking, where your thoughts and your feelings come together, can come back online. So if they say, you know, I can't make a decision, I can't do anything, that's perfectly normal. But what they're telling you is I'm still in hyperarousal and I still think that the crisis is happening to me right now. Gotcha. I still think the tiger is chasing me. And so what you've got to do is ground them or ground yourself to recognize that you are no longer in crisis, to the point like the crisis where the tiger is chasing you. You still have problems, you still have issues, you still have things, but you can't make decisions about those things unless you realize that right this second, I am safe. Right this second. And so we've got to help people realize, like reground themselves, like, yes, what's happening to you is horrible, but right now you are upright, you are breathing, you are safe.
Gotcha.
Does that
yeah, absolutely. Okay. And I think Clancy had a question in the chat about fawning, you know, that response, crisis response of like people pleasing as a trauma response. And if you have any suggestions about how to get people out of that cycle.
So let's see. I wonder if it's second guess what clients are saying. Okay. So extreme people pleasing, or people pleasing in general, I'd want to ask more questions about how they're people pleasing. So my natural instinct is to want to ask questions, but if it's productive to second guess what the client's saying they need, don't need, and what would help them. Okay, so they think, whatever they think they need, the likelihood that you're going to be able to change their mind is pretty slim. Because you're arguing with their belief system. Now, if you're staring at their house and they're saying, I need a new roof, and you know that they don't need a new roof, that's different from them. Again, I'd want to ask more questions. But so if it's something very obvious, you can, of course, second guess them. But I would go about it if you think that what their needs are is incorrect to what they actually need, you would want to dig a little bit deeper as to why they think that is. You wouldn't argue with them, but the idea of potentially second guessing them in the way that you would say, okay, so you're telling me you need what? What would be something that they would ask for? Maybe they don't say they don't need something.
I could give an example. Sometimes,
okay, yeah.
Sometimes we do hear from clients, you know, like, oh, don't worry about me. And those other people that are on your caseload or whatever, they're in much worse situations. And so I'm okay. I'm gonna figure it out. But like, I really appreciate. Thanks so much for coming by. You know, like this kind of like somebody else is in worse shape than me, and I want to really make sure they get helped. Maybe that is kind of one of those.
Okay, so that's comparing trauma. So it's not necessarily people pleasing. That's actually just comparing your trauma to other people. So and we have a lot of that, and we have such big hearts in the South that we often say that. And so you can counter saying, You're right. There are absolutely other people, but we have other people helping them. I'm here with the ability to help you. And so, you know, I have this here, and whether or not you want it or not, but you can acknowledge you're absolutely right. And it would be important to acknowledge that you are right. There are other people who have it worse than you. And there's other people who have it better, but that doesn't mean you're any less qualified to have this service. And so you qualify for it. So you have the opportunity to take it. You don't have to take it. I will go to someone else with the same situation as you and offer it to them. Because those people with worse, we have someone else on that. But this is what I can offer you. So Some of it is people pleasing. Some of it is just big hearts. And you want to acknowledge that, like, oh my God, that is so kind of you. You have such a big heart. That's wonderful. However, you absolutely qualify for this. And, if you don't take it, I'm going to go to someone else with your exact same situation and give it to them. So do you want it or not? So that's how I would counter it. I wouldn't argue with them or, try and force them into it. But it is comparing trauma, which we do have a hard time with. Absolutely. Yes, strengths-based approach. Acknowledge empathy impulses that they have. You want to acknowledge it and give them credit for the fact that they, want to give to someone else, which is amazing. But at the same time, we're like, we have this for you.
Does anybody else have any questions for Marie? Great. I think sometimes, especially those of us in a helping profession, tend to think of the trauma that our clients have been through, but it's really important for us, and thanks for guiding us through this conversation, to acknowledge that those of us who live in the U.S. have had the trauma of COVID, and those of us who live in South Louisiana have had the repeated trauma of potentially losing our own homes. I think it's 13 times in the last 16 months or something, as we've faced that many different weather events. And so in many ways, we've gone through various compacting traumas and need to acknowledge that and find ways of dealing with our own trauma, again, with the oxygen mask metaphor, so that we can use our brains, we can be the rational ones, we can be the ones that are in the helping role. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to share that knowledge with us, and so that we can think how that impacts our day-to-day lives. And those of us who are in this for our jobs can use that,
especially the long haul.
To continue to do our jobs and not to burn out, become crispy. I like your phrase.
Yeah. And I mean, I know these things. I teach these things, still happen to me. So do not feel bad if you're like, oh man, I checked all those boxes. It's fine. I messed it all up too. So just take a page out of my book and, step back and just start breathing. It's the least you can do.
Right. We do have a little time left. If anybody has announcements or something that they would like to share with the larger group, now would be the time to offer that. Nope. All right. Well, we don't need to belabor that point. If there's not any announcements, then Elsa, is there anything else that we need to cover today before we roll off?
No, just that our next ARCH, Acadiana Housing Alliance joint meeting will be to be determined. We're running up against some holidays and just want to make sure that we schedule that and being mindful of everyone's calendars. And it will cover the third and fourth quarter review. So just kind of keep an eye out for a newsletter coming out, which will include the date so that you can save that on your calendar.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for being with us this time, and we'll send some information out about when we're going to gather again. Have a great day.